Hello, guys and girls. The program you are about to hear will be both fun and educational, but it is not a substitute for medical advice. Although we are doctors, we are not your doctors. Hello and welcome to Travel Medicine. As always, I'm your friendly neighborhood internal medicine doc, Dr. J.
And I'm your millennial ER doc, Dr. Ward.
And
Oh,
this
I like it. Millennial ER doc. Our guest today is someone who we're excited to introduce. Let's meet James.
Hi everybody, my name is James Ham. I'm an emergency physician in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Let's start there. What's it like? Because I know nobody believes me. What is it like living and working in Hawaii?
You know, it's one of those things where the first few months, you think it's like the best thing in the world. And then there's this kind of sense of impending doom when you think of like tsunamis and being on this rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Supposedly the most isolated island in any part of the Pacific, supposedly, because of how far it is from other large bodies of land. So, there's always these little kind of things, and they make these movies about disasters and all these things, and we have these disaster drills. Overall, it's pretty good. The cost of milk is 2 or 3 times, so I don't drink as much milk.
It's okay. Josh is lactose intolerant, and I'm not a fan of milk.
Well, and it's just one of those things where you have to realize that everything that comes to Hawaii has to be on a boat. Great.
That includes the patients, because I lived in Hawaii for some time, and I did some contract work there. And I asked because you seem genuinely happy every time I talk to you. And I remember 3 months into my 6-month contract, I'd see somebody on a beach and I'd be like, God damn tourists.
Well, it's funny because I came to Hawaii through the military, so it was kind of a different way of coming in. So I came in as like an invader, so it was kind of a little different approach. But a lot of my friends actually are from Hawaii, and a lot of them actually moved back. So it was not hard for me to reconnect with them and have a group. So I always call myself a permanent tourist. I think that's a good approach to have here. But they ask you for your phone number, and it's still a mainland number because I don't know why I haven't changed. So it's
you mean you're not using the tin can and string by the professor?
Exactly.
For the coconut.
But I have picked up on how to pronounce the names of the streets, or the name of the state fish, remember it, humuhumu, nuku apua'a. Just so you pronounce things properly now, and it's just phonetic, just kind of.
Is it also known as tuna?
No, it's actually it's a luxury to be here, but you also pay a price. The median house price now is $755,000. I think as a physician you'll be okay, and then you realize, oh man, I can barely afford the median. Just kind of come to grips with it, and you just realize, hey, I'm just like everybody else looking for a job, trying to stay here on the island.
You came as an invader. You came from the military. Were you doing emergency medicine in the military as well, or what? Tell us a little bit about your background.
I actually had a scholarship to go to medical school through the Army, and I ended up doing my residency in a kind of a combined military-civilian residency program with the University of Washington and Madigan Army Medical Center. And after residency, the Army definitely likes to utilize emergency physicians in multiple roles, and they kind of, around 2008 or so, they started to push emergency physicians towards these forward, call them battalion surgeons or brigade surgeons, and they're more or less just like field physicians, for a unit. And
you said they call them Italian surgeons?
No, battalion, like an army
battalion. I was like, that seems like a weird nickname. Hey, I'll get to the Italian surgeon over here.
Exactly. There were jobs for me to go to work in an emergency department. I was in Korea. Being Korean myself, I thought it'd be great to work in an emergency department in Korea and go kind of internationally, because that's why I kind of joined the military. Lo and behold, the position I somehow got assumed by somebody else. And they said, hey, we have some options for you. You could go to Kansas, or you could go to Kansas. And then, so then I was like, I'm going to volunteer for a non-traditional hospital role and try to do one of these field positions. So I actually applied for and got this job as the brigade surgeon for the 130th Combat Engineer Brigade, which is a multifunctional engineer brigade that does everything from building bridges and schools to blowing up roadside bombs after they detect them, being one of the first units into Germany during D-Day. So it's a very historically cool unit. And I thought, hey, this would be kind of fun. being fresh out of residency, I thought to myself, hey, they're engineers. They wear pocket protectors and tape on their glasses, and that's the kind of what they do. And so I thought that that's kind of who I would be working with. It ended up being the exact opposite. So it was kind of a rude awakening being in that unit, tasked to go to deploy to Afghanistan with them. It's kind of one of those things where, hey, I'm ready for it. I'm trained. Let's go do what I'm trained to do. Soon, lo and behold, they ended up retasking our unit to become in charge of all humanitarian engineer operations throughout the Pacific. So instead of going on this exciting deployment that I thought I would be ready for and going to do, being trained in emergency medicine and trained in military trauma, I'm stuck in this job that I didn't really feel like I was trained for or ready to do.
As opposed to the exciting deployment option was to go to Afghanistan, and
Exactly.
instead you were reassigned to Hawaii.
No. Still be in Hawaii, but from Hawaii, get ready and then deploy to Afghanistan. And instead, I was stationed in Hawaii, and then 6 months later, they were more or less like, hey, well, you guys are going to the Philippines. We're going to be doing this humanitarian operation to win the hearts and minds of the Filipino people, so that they'll embrace the American way and not the way of the kind of the terrorist organizations that are growing up there in the Philippines.
Did you build a Manny Pacquiao robot?
I did try to be Manny Pacquiao's doctor, though. I did ask for that, and unfortunately he didn't answer any of my emails.
Was that your first exposure to humanitarian organizations and humanitarian missions?
Yes, actually it was. It was definitely more or less the American approach to humanitarian aid, showing up and being responsible for all the preventive health, being responsible for not only are we taking care of our own troops, but then later finding out that now I'm also in charge of running a humanitarian operation to take care of the Filipino people. It was very interesting too, because you're dealing with a lot of hard-headed, combat engineer types who are very alpha and very micromanaging, posture to go fight in Afghanistan. And now that same mentality, and you're now in charge of building roads, building schools, building clinics throughout the Philippines, using kind of a different approach when you were initially had plans to go build forward bases and roads and things like that in Afghanistan. And
So how did you make that transition?
It's difficult. First try to get the right courses. So the military sent me to the tropical medicine course in Bethesda, which was awesome. Taking the test shy of becoming a diplomat in tropical medicine. So, I tried to prepare myself in coursework and get mentally ready for some of the things that we would see in the Philippines, and kind of be the travel doc, I guess, and making sure that all the soldiers, got their Japanese encephalitis vaccine, they got all the rest of their shots, their typhoid, et cetera, all up to date. Not something that I would ever see myself doing as an emergency physician. I was not trained in that aspect, wasn't trained in organizing or arranging mass vaccination drives or whatnot. Just realized, hey, it's your job, it's what I'm supposed to be doing, and just do it.
Now you're in charge of these same projects now that you started on, or are you still working with the Army engineers?
No, I actually did 2 years with the Army. After the deployment to the Philippines, we also did another combat engineer exercise, like in Korea. But outside of those two, I actually was sent to Tripler Army Medical Center here in Honolulu to work as an emergency physician. Again, I was hoping to go to Afghanistan in a deployment as an Army emergency physician, and the government furlough in 2012 kind of ruined that, so they ended up keeping me as an emergency physician alongside civilian emergency physicians, just cranking away, seeing a lot of, in my opinion, abuses of the emergency department. People who don't have access to primary care. I think I would see maybe, the national average is around like 13-14% of emergency patients actually needing emergency services. I would probably seeing half that, maybe 5 or 6% of patients I saw actually need emergency services. So it was a very depressing year. And applying, kicking and screaming, just begging to go deploy was very ironic because
Yeah, listen to you. Like, I keep getting stuck in Hawaii.
I know, right?
It's exactly what I was talking about. It's not the paradise you all imagine. It's more like Breaking Bad with coconut.
Well, it wasn't necessarily the place. I love being here. It's just more or less the job. We all want to find purpose. I ended up finding a good job here at a small hospital here, and it's founded by, actually, ironically, it was founded by one of my best friends here. His grandfather founded the hospital as one of the four founding surgeons.
Now, Ward, we usually refer to you as our ER MacGyver, not least for which your ability to do some amazing things with duct tape. But you and James are both emergency medicine physicians, but it
That's
sounds
correct,
like you do a lot of very different things. So, Ward, how are you different from James in terms of emergency medicine?
Well, I think emergency medicine, like what James was alluding to, differs a lot, depends on where you're practicing. In certain settings, certain urban settings, or certain even even rural settings, emergency medicine is the only place where people have access to medicine, period. As a result, we do end up seeing a lot of acute care patients who are sick and who have true medical emergencies, in other words. Also, we end up seeing a lot of patients who just need, who need medical care, even if they're not true emergencies. Nobody else will see them. As you found out, Josh, if you're in some remote regions of an island or remote regions of an inland state, where the closest clinic is an hour and a half away and they have a full patient load, and the next appointment is a month and a half away, they're going to go to the ER. So that I have a lot in common with James. James, now in your non-military or even your military work, did you encounter a lot of trauma?
Aside from the combat engineer brigade kind of settings, the same unit also had a construction effects side. So we actually had quite a bit of circular saw go through someone's thigh. That was kind of concerning. Roadside accidents, people getting run over by cars. I don't know, assault with like a guy who comes in with a slit throat, holding his neck with a towel, kind of a situation.
That's something people can survive, because television and movies have led me to believe that's it. If you touch the throat, you just fall down.
Well, it depends on what's cut. The good thing about Hawaii, as the good thing, there's no guns here, which is really nice. We don't see the gunshot wounds that you see in LA or other metropolitan areas. And a lot of it has to do with being an island. Any gun that comes on the island has to come on via an airplane, usually, through your luggage,
that makes sense.
Through your your shipping stuff, and you have to declare it. And so all that information is then sent to the police, and you're required to either get them licensed. And then there's a huge database of who has what gun. I do some outside work on Maui, which has a lot of need. There is quite a bit of trauma there. A lot of drownings we see, even here at the hospital work on Oahu. But you see a lot of drownings, a lot of head injuries. Unfortunately, a lot of people do come to Paradise to commit suicide, which is really sad. Josh, you probably remember seeing all these people riding around mopeds, kind of like you're in Vietnam or in Cambodia. People buzzed around these little mopeds without helmets, 2 or 3 people on them at a time together, bobbing and weaving through traffic.
Our surgeon friend calls them organ donors.
Yeah, but the thing isn't like in Chicago or in California, but they're going high speed because there's lots of open road for these 300 cc, 400. Can't really do that here. So you see unfortunately a lot of injuries that are kind of low impact, and they aren't really donating organs. It's like
they get to keep their kidneys.
Yeah, they get to keep their organs, but they're missing a leg or two, or they're impaled, or they're in the hospital for a long time recovering. But it's the protocols for trauma aren't as advanced as they could be in other places, and it just takes a little time.
Everything gets imported from milk to patients.
Exactly.
I feel like everything, the few times I had the pleasure of visiting Hawaii, everything is on an island time. Things are just a little bit more relaxed, and things just felt a little bit more informal.
It's so true, and trying to implement the latest hospital administrator strategy to improve X number versus just keeping it local and keeping it friendly is kind of a good way to practice medicine. And
kind of you've been all over the place between your combat engineering and your volunteering, your humanitarian efforts in Hawaii, but now you're involved with a different humanitarian group, correct?
Yeah. Proud to say that I'm a founder of the small nonprofit organization called WaterHandsHope. We started out as kind of a one-man show and became incorporated with three other friends. So the 4 of us started this group, and our first trip was 7 of us, and our last trip past November was 15. So we're still pretty small. We started in 2014 on our 3rd year, I guess. Technically our 4th year, I guess. We've already been.
So 4 friends, you just decided you were going to go on a vacation and then doctor there?
No,
How did this all come together?
yeah, well, you know what? Well, it started out as kind of you could probably sense some of my, not disgruntledness, but I didn't really feel accomplished. Like, I wish felt like I could have done more in my Army career. So I kind of had this, like, I wasn't fully satisfied, but it was time for me to get out. So I got out of the Army, and I had this year where I wasn't, like, sure if I was going to stay in Hawaii, or if I was going to go back to the mainland, or if I was going to apply for a fellowship. So I ended up traveling. So I spent time in Nepal, I spent time in Thailand, I spent time in Korea, I spent time in Papua New Guinea. How I started in Papua New Guinea with a friend from high school. His father is a retired orthopedic surgeon, Larry Hull, and he invited me to come over and stay with him. And he wanted me to give my opinion on some of the projects he was working on. And one of the projects was this medical clinic that serves a population of around 10,000 villagers in kind of the middle of the highlands, literally the middle of nowhere in Papua New Guinea. Being a very difficult place to get to, fell in love with the place, and I think it had to do with it being so raw and untouched, and knowing that there's all these potentials for badness, but also potentials for goodness, and I could write my own story here. Just a place where you're looking around and seeing, hey, where are all the other NGOs at? Where are all the people that are supposed to be coming here to help these people out? And there isn't a single person.
So you chose Papua New Guinea because you had a friend whose father lived there.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that WaterHandsHope actually does? So you guys founded the society.
I left there, and I kind of felt I needed to come back to kind of do things. And I showed up there. I'd heard about some traumatic amputations that happened there because of tribal wars. And in the 90s and even early 2000s, there was a lot of tribal wars still going on. And, so there was a big need for prosthetic hands. There was also a need for medical care, like I mentioned earlier, and just basic health needs. You find people, I found people in these clinics just more or less, kids dying of diarrhea. You find that 1 of 3 kids don't make it to age 5. And it's just kind of a sad kind of a place, and yet no one's there to go help. And so, during the Christmas of 2013, so I just put a GoFundMe request out saying, hey, I'm going to go back by myself, and who wants to come with, or who can you donate? And within about 4 or 5 months or so, I raised $10,000 just off of social media. Then at that point, I was like, crap, I didn't expect to raise this much money. I guess I really have to go do this. It's like, now I'm held accountable because I have other people's money, right? And so it came to the point where I ran into a couple of friends who had heard about the story. One was a college student here at the University of Hawaii who heard about 3D printing technology and prosthetic hands. And another friend was a kind of out-of-work, semi-unemployed contractor. He just, he builds things in people's homes. And we all decided that, hey, let's kind of put together a little group. And then we had another friend who does IT kind of work, but he was a big opponent of kind of volunteering, and he had experience kind of starting up a nonprofit. And so he decided, 4 of us were like, hey, let's start a nonprofit. Let's do it. So let's incorporate and let's see what we could do. And there's only 2 physicians, a physician assistant, a pre-med student who's also a Marine Corps veteran. We had another University of Hawaii student looking for somewhere to volunteer and really wanted to come help out. And that was kind of the group.
That explains hope, and I love that your organization name has a pun built right in, because you actually are literally and figuratively giving people hands. And nothing makes me happier than a pun well placed.
Through another physician here in Hawaii, through an organization called Aloha Medical Mission, I was actually introduced to the LN4 hand. It's a prosthetic hand that you could probably look up. It's www.ln-4.org, and it's the Ellen Meadows Prosthetic Hand Foundation. And it's this organization that looks for ambassadors to deliver these prosthetic hands all around the world. So I was given 14 of these hands in my luggage to go bring to Papua New Guinea. And I showed up and I asked 2 different hospitals, hey, do you guys have any people who need these hands?
You guys have anyone who needs a hand?
Literally, right? It was great. And you show up there and you have I think the first place I showed up, there's 30 people who showed up who had some kind of a traumatic hand amputation or arm amputation. And you just you're like, whoa, I can't give you all. My plan was to do 7 at this hospital and 7 at another hospital. I uncovered this whole domestic violence epidemic that's all throughout Papua New Guinea. And so these women, three women, the first 3 people that I ended up fitting these prosthetic hands for, they had their hands chopped off by their ex-spouses.
This has nothing to do with tribal wars. This has nothing to do with outside occurrences. This is just the Papua New Guinea version of cops.
Yeah, I mean
Can I just
it's
say that?
instead of guns, they carry these bush knives, which are machetes that are about 20 inches long. They're super sharp, but I've seen cases where people have literally had their skulls cut right off. They carry them around for defense. They carry them around obviously for violence in this sense. And the other epidemic that's going on in Papua New Guinea is alcohol abuse. And so you combine the two with that being in a very poor area and seeing westernization happen and having people who don't have the means to get the things that they need for that everyone else is getting, like cell phones are more important than having a toilet or running water, right? In some of these places.
Well, that's the thing, James. As an ER doc, I'm sure you noticed that we kind of have a pulse on what's going on in the community, and dare I say, a majority of our come into the ER with problems that are not just medical. And you notice the solution isn't just medical. What are the psychosocial issues going on in the community at the time? And I'm surprised to hear that there's that much domestic violence going on now, that part of the world.
It's one of those things where at the end of the day, you're discharged. Here's a contact for social work. Here's a contact for an alcohol abuse center. Here's a domestic violence shelter that you could stay at. But you're in Papua New Guinea and there's none of that. So what do I go? Like, what's the disposition, right? And I kind of felt like I needed to do something other than just hit the discharge button on the computer and send them away,
Well, now, did WaterHandsHope start out as mostly a clinic to repair amputations?
No, it started out actually as provide basic water access and basic prosthetic.
That's where the water in HandsHope.
Yeah, and like the hope aspect was part of this clinic, I guess. So I guess if you kind of wanted to like go through each three of those things, I guess, and I think education and empowerment kind of ended up going in that hope. And honestly, how the name started, it was just me at home on a computer trying to start this GoFundMe thing, and I was like, what three words sound really cool together? I think it has to be three words, And it blew up into this whole reinterpretation. I have a friend who kind of drew it up as this Maslow's triangle of needs. Like you start with water, which symbolizes the basic needs.
The organization does actually work on creating access to clean water.
Yeah, so that's how we started. So we started off with, as part of a Rotary grant, Dr. Larry Hull actually had this Rotary grant to build rain catchments for these schools, and he needed volunteers to come help build these things. And so that's one of the kind of the first things that we started was, hey, what are three things that we could do there? So we're going to do water. So we're going to build these rain catchments. Water, sanitation, hygiene kind of go together. So then we're going to build some toilets with that. We're going to build some hand wash stations. And then we're going to also provide some of these prosthetic hands. And then we're going to go, work in this clinic for, a few weeks. And that's going to be what we do. And now it's turned into much more in-depth thing where we're dealing with social justice projects. We're dealing with education and empowerment projects. Not just working in a clinic. We're bringing endoscopy equipment to a surgeon. We're providing advanced trauma life support courses or advanced cardiac life support courses in the hospital setting. We're setting up community, continuing medical education type lectures in these hospital settings. We're providing nurse seminars for a nursing school that's locally there. And in addition to that, we're also, providing water filtration. We're teaching hand washing and sanitation, basic kind of health. So there's just all these things we're doing, and it's turning into this. I guess I wanted to say that it's more of a demand kind of oriented organization where instead of being a typical medical nonprofit where, hey, we have surgeons and this is one specific thing that we do, or we have prosthetic hands, this is the one thing that we're going to do and fit them. It's the opposite. Going to a community and telling them, hey, what do you guys need? And can I go back home to Hawaii or back to the U.S. or back to other, I have friends in Canada and Europe as well that are partners with us. How do we find these partners and see what skill sets we have and see what connections we have and use our social media networks and then go back and bring what they ask for?
So it sounds like each time you find something new to add to the community, you kind of listen to their feedback and then find another project. So you went from water and then you added hands and then you added seminars and then education. What's the next step that you're going to try and add, or what's the next thing that this community in the Highlands
what are the needs?
Could benefit
and this
from?
is really exciting, and I'm really excited that I was able to connect with Santosh about this. They're asking us for a medical laboratory, and it's not that we're going to build it for them. It's not that we're going to design it for them or anything like that. It's they have the demand for it. They just want the consultation and to ask how do they best go about doing this. You see an entire region and there's nationally, there's only one clinical microbiology laboratory and one clinical histology laboratory in the nation. And so it's sadly, you have samples that are shipped all the way over to Port Moresby, which is, a good solid 2-3 hour flight, impossible to reach by land, by the way. Then these samples have to be run in their laboratory, and then reports are sent back. And it could take months, if not up to a year, for some of these reports to come back. And by that time, the patient's already dead of sepsis or dead from their cancer that they weren't able to figure out how to treat. And so how do we keep things locally? And having friends like Santosh and our other friend Susan, who are excited and who have experience working in some of these areas and designing these things, and also getting the local champions and the local support. I'm happy to announce that the local hospital there that we're supporting, they were able to actually get us $600,000 grant from their government to actually fund and support a laboratory. So it's self-sustaining. Like getting that support and getting the people there who are eager. They just need to be pointed in the right direction. And that's kind of what I think that this project kind of epitomizes what we kind of want to do. And
for those of you at home, labs are something that most of us take for granted, regardless of your feelings about Obamacare or Trump care or whatever the latest healthcare du jour is. Most hospitals, even community ones, are really within only about a couple hours drive of a laboratory themselves if it's not built in. And that is how you identify bacteria. It's how you stain urine or blood, look at cholesterol levels. I mean, a very basic outfitted lab can perform a huge number of services for its surrounding community. It sounds like you're almost transitioning at least their healthcare very rapidly from rural bush medicine in some ways almost to a much more modern techniques.
Now, may I ask, what is the approach medical professionals are taking in Papua New Guinea to set up labs in remote areas?
Yeah,
because
so
I work in a rural hospital. One of the hospitals I work at is rural, and our emergency department, we don't have a lab. We have point of care testing, and we're actually able to do a lot, but point of care testing as meaning, these rapid strips are quite expensive. I don't know what we would do if we didn't have that capability.
So they have basic laboratory capabilities. So they're able to run a CBC or a chem panel, which, to the layperson is more or less to look at the types of cells that are in your blood, and also to look at the types of electrolytes or different markers for kidney disease and liver function in your blood. And so those tests are able, so they're able to make a clinical judgment based off of those. It's the microbiology and histology, taking it one step further. Having a patient who is hospitalized and suffering from an infection, and unfortunately having only basic archaic antibiotics that are available to them, and with these growing epidemics of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis and among other kind of infections that are occurring, how do you know what's growing in their blood or what's growing in their wound that we need to treat effectively? And it's also a good way to provide cost-effective medicine, because instead of wasting antibiotics on a wound that may be resistant to that drug, you could actually isolate which specific antibiotic will work for that infection.
You've worked in a lot of different regions and had some, sounds like, exposure to tropical medicine. What sort of things are unique or endemic to Papua New Guinea?
One thing that is we'll just start with the new and the weird stuff first. I guess that's always kind of more sexy to talk about, but necrotizing enterocolitis really did ring a bell in my brain, and I had to really dig deep to remember what it was from medical school. And it's a clostridial infection that affects newborns primarily. And it was really sad to actually see quite a few of these cases in the pediatric wards, and was realizing that these kids have this flesh-eating bacteria. There was a vaccine for it, and I believe it was heavily administered by the Australian government in the 80s and 90s, and they supposedly rid the entire country of this. And so then they end up destroying the vaccine for some reason. And then there's this growing trend of it, and it's actually occurs by, unfortunately, with the diet. And the Papua New Guinea people are very protein deficient, and they've managed to deal with their protein deficiency in different means. And unfortunately, one of the means is unfortunately for their kids to die off early. So the ones that survive are the ones that are able to actually live off of a low protein diet. And then at the same time, they have these boluses of high protein through festivals or through different weddings or whatnot. So probably once a month or once every few months, they'll get this massive bolus of protein. And unfortunately, it's not always cooked. And the soft nibbly bits are the pieces that the babies get and the kids get. And inside that is usually some type of gut bacteria or clostridium from the soil. And that actually infects these kids.
Necrotizing enterocolitis is generally thought of in the States is generally thought of as a disease limited to preemies or really, really young infants, like 1 to 2 day olds. Is that different in Papua New Guinea?
It is, and it has to do with being protein deficient and not able.
I see. Yeah, well, I mean, we hardly, just for reference, we hardly, or our listeners who are not medical professionals, we hardly would see that in a older infant or a child here in the States.
It's not a common infection in the U.S.
Right.
One of the requirements CDC Yellow Book and the World Health Organization is to actually get a Japanese encephalitis virus vaccine. Risk of that is, if you're going to be in the country for more than 30 days, then it's a requirement. But you see a lot of these weird viral kind of syndromes, and obviously without having a lot of virology and PCR and really fancy kind of tests, you just kind of, hey, this guy has some kind of viral disease. I'm not sure what it is. I hope it doesn't kill him, but we'll watch him in the clinic or watch him in the hospital for a few days and give him supportive care and try to roll out some bacterial infections with what limited labs we have and go from there. So I think just the weird viral infections are kind of rampant quite a bit, and that's kind of one thing that's always kind of intrigued me to see kind of what kind of weird viruses. Not only is there such a weird amount of flora and fauna that you'll see in Papua New Guinea, just from the birds and the animals and the plants and stuff, but you also probably see all kinds of weird viruses, and maybe where the next emerging scary virus comes from. But there are like viruses like dengue and other hemorrhagic fevers that are kind of emerging in Papua New Guinea. There's definitely malaria is definitely a big one, and it's definitely limited to the coastal regions. So we're very lucky in the highlands where we're at that elevation where we don't have to worry about certain mosquitoes kind of creeping.
Oh, malaria is boring. It's a shock every time I come back and I don't have it these days.
The sad thing is looking at how the government distributes medical supplies and medical care. AusAid, which is the Australian version of USAID, gives quite a bit of medical supplies to the clinic that we're at. So we're very fortunate and blessed that we don't have to lug a bunch of medical supplies with us. It's just a matter of not having the people who know how to actually administer these medications or drugs. You end up showing up there and you look in the stockpile and it's like half of it is like anti-malarials. And you're just kind of wondering, like, does anybody who sent this medication know that we don't see a lot of malaria here, And it's usually the 1 or 2 persons that go to the coastal area and then come back infected. So we do see it, but it's just not a very common thing to see up there.
So let's get a little bit sensational for a moment. I mean, obviously there's certainly going to be worms and viruses and a lot of tropical infections, which I'm looking forward to learning about when Doctors Ward and Santosh and I come out there. But one of the things I think that people do remember about Papua New Guinea, or at least one of the ones that it used to be known for in the medical community, is that's where the disease Kuru was discovered, one of the earliest known prion diseases, or misfolded proteins. And it was found in the Foray tribe of Papua New Guinea, who, at the time, was practicing cannibalism. So, some real life, not serial killers, this is specifically part of a religious cultural rite. They don't serve people on the restaurant menu. Or maybe they do, James. Have you met any cannibals?
So the only cannibal that I met was actually in Brisbane, Australia, which was really weird. It was a guy from the island of Tonga. Unfortunately, I was not able to meet any Papua New Guinean cannibals, but it was just an interesting thing. And going back to that story, this Tongan gentleman comes up to us and asks us what we're doing or what we're from, and being Asian looking anyway, I just don't belong in Australia. So everyone's asking me like, hey, what are you doing here? Kind of a thing. And so this other odd looking fella, he's from Tonga, comes up to me and he's like, hey, what's going on? And told him we're going to Papua New Guinea, and he immediately refers to the whole practice of kuru in Papua New Guinea, and he says that his family would do it in Tonga as well. So it'd just be interesting to see some of the, I don't know too much about Tonga, but
Was he giving you dietary advice like rosemary and 2 splashes of?
what he actually, right? And you're gonna laugh. We were in a Hungry Jack's, which is the Australian version of Burger King, which is even funny.
Oh, we know Hungry Jack's.
We went to Hungry Jack's. Yeah, we actually went to a Hungry. I went to a Hungry Jack's right before our tour of the morgue, and the comedian said, "Well, speaking of rotten flesh, you guys just came back from Hungry Jack's."
But yeah, it's very similar to the practices are very similar in the sense that you actually they practice cannibalism here in Hawaii as well. In the sense that Captain Cook, after they conquered him, killed him, they actually ate him. And the idea behind it is to actually gain the strength and the knowledge of your enemies.
Historically, that has not been proven. There was associations with saving rudimentary bones and flesh and cooking flesh of dead enemies, but not actually consuming it. And Captain Cook's leg was returned, and it was meant as a gesture of honoring in some of his things. So I'm going to dispute you from the historical record only because I get really nerdy about some of this history.
Well, you talk with the locals will say something different,
And again, I don't live in Hawaii, but I'm just saying the tribe has been studied, and they've said probably was cooked, unlikely to be eaten.
Wow. Well, as far as you know, today, is this cultural practice still going on in Tonga or Papua New Guinea?
If you ask somebody, and we've had that taboo question asked, and the reason why I say taboo is that the people of Papua New Guinea are proud, and not only that, they actually, sadly, are trying to move on from their traditional practices and kind of adopt Western practices. And so, the reason I say sadly is because you see a lot of these, travel practices being lost, at an alarming pace. And not that eating people is a good practice you want to keep, but trying to find someone who actually knows of it is kind of hard these days. And I definitely, as a side project, it would be very cool to see us kind of explore that, and ask and really kind of, and it's hard also because you're in a country where 99% of the people will say that they're Christian, and it has a lot to do with the term what I call I didn't come up with the term, but cargo cult, something that you should really look up. A guilt by association, or I guess a benefit by association kind of a practice.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Christianity has a lot of ritual cannibalism too. Of course, I'm referring to the transubstantiation claims of the wafer and wine to body and blood. So this is one of the few times, guys, I'm actually not being facetious, but we have a long, rich history of ritual cannibalism. It's just not done with close relatives.
Exactly. I'm sure you guys all know the practice in Papua New Guinea is there to kind of pass on the knowledge, and it's one of those things where the whole idea of nature and nurture, right? So the whole aspect of it is all these things that you've learned you want to pass on to your offspring. So it's just I guess the practice was there to make sure that that things you learned in your life would be passed on to your family.
Have you seen any unique cultural practices from any of the 80 different tribes that live in Papua New Guinea during your visits there?
Yeah, so it was very exciting to we were very fortunate, and it was actually timed. It was intentionally timed for us to be there during the Mount Hagen show, which is also called a Sing Sing. I guess the idea behind the Sing Sing, there's definitely different interpretations as to kind of how they began, but it kind of began as kind of like a UN kind of a gathering. So you have all these tribes that are warring against each other or whatnot, and it's a way for them to come together, call a truce, and discuss things, whether it's politics or whether it's agriculture or how to grow things better, or just to kind of settle disputes. Have these little contests or competitions. Looking at some of the practices, you see the different uniqueness of how they dress, or how they, you have the mud men of Goroka, you have some of the crocodile men of the Sepik, and they have these outfits where they dress up as different characters. And it was really interesting was how World War II really shaped Papua New Guinea. And you have an entire tribe of people who dress up completely as head to toe, just wearing black, some type of black oil to make themselves look kind of like shadows. And they actually will carry these wooden cutouts of rifles. and they'll go around, I guess, in the forest. The practice behind it was for them to haunt the Japanese soldiers that were kind of in their region. And they kind of evolved into this practice where now they just go around marching as these shadows, carrying these wooden rifles around. And it's to kind of give them power, because they believe that that practice actually made the Japanese leave. Going back to the whole cargo cult, I'll just spend a couple minutes, if you don't mind, talking about that, and it'll kind of explain to you kind of how the people are shaped and how their kind of culture, unfortunately, has been evolved in maybe in a bad way. But it's the idea of, like I said, kind of guilt by association. And the idea behind it is that in World War II, you had mostly American paratroopers that would land in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. They would build these airfields. The tribal people looking on see these white kind of ghost type people come in, and they build these airfields, and they build these old buildings, and these airplanes, magical airplanes, would come down, and they would drop off cargo. Put two and two together, very similarly to the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy. These cults develop that they feel that if you build it, they will come. So they decided to build all these runways all across the entire country in hopes of planes coming and dropping off this magical cargo that has like guns and chocolate and cigarettes and all these alcohol and all these things that are desirable. And so you have all these airstrips, and supposedly Papua New Guinea has one of the highest numbers of airstrips per capita in the world. The idea was that if they even actually took to the point of acting like they were doing some of the business practices that we saw these soldiers do, and then World War II ends, and then you have all of these airfields just there, and no planes are coming. And so they kind of evolved into this religion of almost like a savior, like you have to maintain these airstrips because the Messiah will come back. These Christian missionaries that came in talking about Jesus the Messiah, and it's kind of turned into this idea of I'm associated with this religion, or I'm associated with this cult. Fast forward to present day time, you have these oil, natural gas kind of companies like Exxon or Chevron or Shell coming there unfortunately, to exploit the country of their natural resources. And they hire local people to do their jobs. And you have these people who get hired on the job, but then they feel like, hey, I'm part of the group now. I'm guaranteed a salary. Instead of I'm hired and I need to work, and then I need to actually get paid for what I work. So you have some of these scary stories where you hear about this guy who was fired because he's not producing at work, at the oil field or, the natural gas plant or wherever they're at. He comes out and he pulls a machete out and he realizes, hey, I'm going to go kill a bunch of people. So he goes on this massacre of all these workers coming into work one morning, and he says, hey, you guys need employees now. You guys should hire me. I'm here to work now. It's just a complete disconnect.
Wow. Now that is a go-getter.
Very proactive, but
right?
That...
So it's just, and then you hear also, there's always these stories of the Australian version of the story is a 20-something-year-old girl who led this expedition of these Australian trekkers through this Kokoda track, which is a very famous Australian historical kind of trail through Papua New Guinea. They woke up one morning to find all of their porters and their guides all hacked to death by this tribe. But in the end, if you actually ask the locals about what happened, it was more or less she'd hired foreign porters and didn't really have the authority to be in that tribal area. So it was, and the irony of it was at the very end of their story is that supposed tribe that hacked these people to death, at the end of it, were like, hey, we're here to carry your stuff now. You guys need a guide now? We're here to help. We've gotten rid of the competition. We're here to work.
I'm never going to an interview in Papua New Guinea. I'm interviewing with Papua New Guinea. I'm just putting it out there.
Right? No, you should hire me. Why? It's okay if you don't want to. That's fine. If someone else wants the job more, really.
That's pretty much. Yep.
So the moral of the story, more or less, is I've never really heard of any violence against tourists or violence against foreigners. It's this disconnect. It's the whole idea of communication barrier there a little bit.
I suppose, but I think that that interview is a good place to end at least this early episode. So with regards to kind of both island medicine and humanitarian medicine, we could easily talk to you for hours, and we will after we get back from Papua New Guinea ourselves, traveling with WaterHandsHope. But
what's to come?
First and foremost, James, thank you so much for both setting this up and giving us the opportunity to come along with you on it. And if anyone else wants to join or is interested in learning about these kinds of opportunities, what would you tell them?
I would say go to our newly built website, www.waterhandshope.org, and or you could email me at james.ham@gmail.com.
Okay, and we'll include those in the show notes. And the last thing we always like to close off with is, can you give us a just the tip from your travels anywhere in the world, a favorite travel story or experience or something that if people have a chance to visit, they shouldn't miss out on?
I guess I kind of have a funny story, I guess, about being in the military. It was in the Philippines, traveling on the humanitarian operation I was telling you about. And we're in these vans, and they made sure that we're in civilian clothes. We're not, we don't stand out like we're in the military. And they had Filipino Army and Filipino police escorts with us that were supposedly, there to protect us in case something happened. And per the Joint Forces Agreement, we weren't allowed to carry our own weapons, so we're just kind of there at the mercy of the people protecting us. And in any military unit, they call us the special staff. So it's the doc, the lawyer, and the chaplain. Kind of the three of us kind of all hang out together because we're not really necessary operational people, I guess. And so we're in this van and we're going from point A to point B. And there's a 20-something-year-old Filipino soldier in plain clothes, but with me, and he's got his little pistol in his little fanny pack, which is really funny, and it's pointed right at me, which is funnier. I was like, hey, can you point that the other way, just in case? And then he looks at me, he's like, oh, don't worry. And I'm like, why? Why shouldn't I worry? And he shows it to me, and he has no clip and he has no bullets in this thing. I ask him, I'm like, well, why don't you have bullets? Aren't you supposed to be protecting us? He says, no, we're not supposed to be carrying bullets. So here we are going through these shady areas, and here I am thinking we're being protected by these military guys. And I asked the lawyer, I was like, aren't they supposed to be protecting us? And so he goes through and he realizes that typical military FUBAR fashion, the agreement was that they were supposed to be carrying weapons, but it said nothing about ammunition. So leave it up to the ignorant, non-military experienced doc to kind of uncover this huge snafu in their plan,
What? No, we didn't think about that. Bullets are dangerous. We're just here to carry weapons.
That was my contribution to the safety and security of Pacific region.
Sounds like you left the Philippines unscathed.
It's even funnier because they had tried to explain to us all these different terrorist organizations. We're in the security brief, and I'm just falling asleep because I had no idea what they're talking about. And I think at the time, Abu Sayyaf had just taken over Al-Qaeda as the number one terrorist organization in the Philippines. A close third was the Mindanao Islamic Liberation Front, and they kept calling him the MILF. And the lawyer and I are just cracking up laughing the whole time in this brief. And we're just and then it's even funnier because then the Filipino counterparts, they're looking at us like, man, these guys are hardcore because they're just laughing at the face of these terrorist organizations,
Take that, milk.
We're just trying hard not to laugh, and everyone, even the Americans, you could tell that they're kind of trying to, but they're not. They're being very professional, right? And I just couldn't hold myself, I'm just cracking up laughing, and our interpreter kept asking us this, why is this so funny? And I didn't really feel like I could explain it to them.
Go ask your parents.
The MILFs are here. I have protection.
Well, James, thank you so much. Again, I look forward to getting a chance to actually meet up with you in Papua New Guinea this September when the travel medicine group will be venturing out to take part in this project with WaterHandsHope.
Looking forward to this trip. It's going to be an awesome trip.
So for everyone else, as always, we love to hear your comments, questions, concerns, and feedback. We would love for you to support us emotionally, spiritually, and financially. You can find the links to do all those things in the show notes, which include our Twitter, our Facebook, our Patreon page. For donations as low as $1 a month, that's $12 a year, you get whole extra bonus material episodes. This show is produced by me with a lot of help from all my co-hosts. Our theme music is by Rachel Leisure. And until next time, as always, happy travels.
Happy travels.